Greetings, savvy truth seekers listening coast to coast and around the globe. It's the Tom Gruber Show, the only show that dares to reveal the truth about sexual ethics from a biblical perspective. Some call him their love guru, others their sex surgeon. It's none other than your end times gladiator and sex truth watchdog. So fasten your seatbelt, open your mind, and prepare for enlightening. Here comes your champion for sex truth, saddled for battle, on a mission for reclaiming the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about sex, love, and the Christopian way. Please welcome your host, Tom Gruber.
Greetings to all of my listeners. I'd especially like to extend a warm welcome to all of you savvy truth seekers. Welcome to the Tom Gruber Show. I'm your host, Tom Gruber. The title of today's message is Christopian Sex, the Final Frontier. Let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered what sex would look like in a perfect utopian world? Have you ever wondered what sex would look like if every man and every woman had perfect health, perfect minds, perfect spirits, perfect bodies, and most importantly, perfect love? Well, I have. To paraphrase Bobby Kennedy, some people look at things the way they are and ask why. I look at things the way they ought to be and ask, why not? Of course, I'm not the first person to talk about utopia. Dictators and cult leaders have made attempts to usher in their own version of heaven on earth and have failed over and over again. Nevertheless, the idea of utopia is a constant theme throughout the Bible, starting from the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis and ending at the new heaven and the new earth in the book of Revelation. But somewhere in between, things went horribly wrong. I go into great detail about exactly what I believe went wrong in my new book entitled Christopian Sex. To put it in a nutshell, I believe there is compelling evidence that the sin of Eden was, and I know that this next statement will probably sound bizarre to many people, but I believe that Eve had an illicit affair with the devil. As a result, I believe she contaminated the gene pool of the entire human race, which explains why we all have a proclivity towards sin. It also explains why it became necessary for God to place certain restrictions on sexual expression, and why sexual freedom needed to be limited for our own good. My book grapples with some very complex yet fascinating issues regarding sexual ethics. I wanted to know precisely what's right, what's wrong, and why. But more importantly, I wanted to know what the ultimate idyllic love style should look like. This journey for truth and discovery put me in radical opposition to the position currently held by the vast majority of mainstream Christianity. So, you may be wondering how I got started on this journey. Well, it all began when I was a senior in high school, clear back in 1971. It all began one fine day when I met Annie Greenfields. Now, I know that some people do not believe in love at first sight, but the second I saw her standing there, to quote a famous Beatles tune, my heart went boom. She made me feel like I had never felt before. But then, when things didn't work out the way I had anticipated, it was like getting whacked in the back of my head with a frying pan. Personally, I can't imagine anyone being more traumatized. I had to get as far away from Ohio as possible. So, that started me on a journey of epic proportions as I began my nationwide search for the next Miss True Blue. I traveled from Ohio to Florida, then to Texas and Las Vegas. Next came California, Colorado, and Rhode Island. From there, I moved to Buffalo and finally back to Ohio. To make a long story short, I can count on one hand the number of Miss True Blues I thought I had met. And each time, guess what? Things didn't pan out. Each time, the aftershock was traumatic. One of the major turning points came when I heard what I now refer to in my new book as the sermon that destroyed all hope. The gist of that message was that heaven was going to be a sex-free environment reserved exclusively for celestial monks and nuns. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Finally, I got to the place where I had given up on love and marriage. But at the same time, I had powerful sex drives. So I decided to sow as many wild oats as possible. First, it was strippers and hookers. Next, I became a regular patron at a local swingers club. Lastly, I stumbled across a lifestyle known as polyamory. Polyamory is similar to swinging, except it focuses on committed, loving relationships, whereas swinging is mainly about recreational sex. During all this time, I was pretty much living life like the prodigal son. Even though I was attending church on a regular basis, I was leading a secret double life. It was church by day and sex clubs by night. I had become a total sex addict. Not only did going cold turkey seem humanly impossible, but to complicate matters, I didn't feel as if I could talk to anyone about it, especially not a pastor. I knew he'd probably tell me to either shape up or ship out. While I was living in Buffalo, it dawned on me that maybe the teachers and preachers were the ones who had it all wrong. So I began doing a lot of research. I remember taking home 20 or 30 books from the library and devouring them. I had one burning question that needed answered. What is the truth about sex? And here's what I discovered. First, I discovered that there are two major purposes for sex: unification and multiplication. The Bible says that when a man and a woman have sex, they become one flesh, which Hebrew scholars say refers to them becoming one in mind, body, and spirit. Then I read the works of a Swedish theologian named Ivan Egnell. He believed that the sin of Eve somehow empowered her with procreative powers. And though that may sound radical to many people, this was a major teaching of the majority of Christian authors prior to Augustine. To me, this was a major revelation. Next, I wanted to know, if God really disapproves of non-monogamy, then why are there so many godly men in the Bible, such as Abraham, Jacob, and David, who had multiple wives, and without even a peep of divine disapproval? I soon discovered how divided the church is and always has been over the issue of polygamy. So I read everything I could from all sides of this issue. I devote an entire chapter in my book to discussing the pros and cons of polygamy. Bottom line, none of the objections to polygamy given by some of the best minds to ever live convinced me that polygamy was something God disapproved of. The reason I feel that the polygamy issue is so important is if the Bible really does allow for polygamy, and personally I'm persuaded that it does, then it's just a small baby step towards proving that the Bible might also approve of Christian polyamory, or what I refer to as Christopian sex. The next major question was, since the word polyamory means many loves, is it even possible to love more than one person at the same time? Of course, most Christians would say, yes, but they would add that there are different kinds of love. And supposedly, the kind of love we should have for a spouse is different from the kind of love we should have for anybody else. The problem I see with that position is, when the Bible tells us that we should love our wives, it uses the exact same Greek word, agape, as when it tells us to love our neighbor. On the other hand, the Greek word for romantic sexual love, which is eros, is nowhere found in the Bible. Even in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the word eros is not found, not even in the Song of Songs, arguably the sexiest book in the Bible. Interesting. Next, I began to wonder about the sex life of Jesus. 2 major movies have been made about the sex life of Jesus. The first movie was The Last Temptation of Christ, and the most recent movie was The Da Vinci Code. Both movies were very controversial. I think the reason for the controversy is the whole idea that Jesus could ever have a sexual thought or desire almost seems heretical to most Christians. However, the idea that Jesus, the only perfect man to ever live, did not have sex is what really seems heretical to me. Here are a few things to consider. Number 1, who ever heard of a baker who never tasted bread? Or who ever heard of a winemaker who never tasted wine? Remember, Jesus was the one who invented sex. Number 2, Jesus constantly referred to himself as the bridegroom. A bridegroom is a man who either is married or is engaged to be married. People don't usually get married just to hold hands. Number 3, the church is referred to as the bride of Christ. Few men would marry a woman who is unwilling to have sex with them. And then, number 4, Jesus is the perfect incarnation of perfect love. That being the case, then, since Mary Magdalene was probably closer to Jesus than any other woman, Jesus must have loved her more than any other man to ever live has ever loved any woman to ever live. So it seems to me, just using pure common sense and logic, that since there are sins of commission and sins of omission, for Jesus and Mary Magdalene to refrain from having sex would have been a sin of omission. A prominent theologian said that when he gets to heaven, he believes he will love 1,000 women just as much as he currently loves his wife. To be fair, he did add that it was only his educated opinion and that there was no scriptural support for that opinion. The question he did not address is whether or not he thought he would have sex with any of those women. Most theologians would probably say that there is simply no way that men and women would be having sex in the afterlife. I deal with probably every objection there is to sex in the afterlife in my book. For example, A handful of Christians believe we will no longer be male or female. Now that objection is really a softball. Still others believe that resurrected Christians won't even have physical bodies. According to those people, we'll all be turned into spirit beings, something like Casper the Friendly Ghost. That objection is a little more difficult to overcome, but I feel N.T. Wright does a fine job of explaining why our resurrected bodies will still be physical, though vastly improved. And I quote Wright in my book. Probably the toughest objection for me was the confrontation Jesus had with the Sadducees when he said that those who are accounted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. This question, more than any other, prompted me to write my book and was the most difficult to deal with. I devote an entire chapter to this issue in my book. Other subjects in my book include the story of Oneida, a Christian community in the 1800s that practiced group marriage. I devote another chapter to the story of my life, particularly as it relates to the writing of my book. I devote a chapter to the subject of nudism. Is it okay for a Christian to take it all off at a nudist colony? I also deal with the subject of lust. What did Jesus mean when he said that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her in his heart has committed adultery? Now you may be thinking, but what about sexual sin? Doesn't the Bible disapprove of sexual sin? Yes, of course, and so do I. However, I believe that adultery mainly refers to adulterated sex. I also believe that fornication refers to idolatrous sex and mainly refers to having sex with prostitutes, particularly cult prostitutes. Another name for polyamory is responsible non-monogamy. Many Christians would say that non-monogamy could never be responsible. Of course, we can all think of plenty of ways where non-monogamy is irresponsible. Rape is obviously irresponsible. Spreading disease is obviously irresponsible. Becoming a hit-and-run baby daddy is obviously irresponsible. Becoming emotionally involved with someone who does not share your values is obviously irresponsible. All of that is simply Sexual Ethics 101. But the question we all need to ask ourselves is, can a sexual activity that is totally responsible and loving be sinful at the same time? I just happen to believe that if sex is practiced responsibly, with the knowledge and consent of everyone involved, it is not cheating. So here is my tailor-made definition of what I believe the idyllic sexual lifestyle should look like. I refer to that idyllic sexual lifestyle as Christopian sex. Christopian sex is the practice, desire, or acceptance by Christian adults of simultaneously having more than one responsible, intimate, heterosexual relationship, usually including sexual intercourse, though not necessarily, with the knowledge and consent of every Christian adult involved. The key word here is responsible. Consider this. Can something be responsible and sinful simultaneously? Put another way, can something be irresponsible without being sinful? These are rhetorical questions. I believe the answer should be self-evident. Furthermore, I believe it should also be self-evident that God does not make up willy-nilly rules without having good reasons for those rules. My new book, Christopian Sex, is now available at Amazon.com. It's a pretty hefty book, weighing in at a little over 600 pages, but it's written in an easy-to-read, easy-to-understand conversational style. And it's well documented too, with plenty of endnotes. I didn't want anybody to read my book and walk away with any unanswered questions. Plus, since my subject matter is so highly controversial, I wanted to make my case as thoroughly as possible. Again, the title of my new book is Christopian Sex. That's Christ, as in Jesus Christ, and opian. That's spelled O, P as in Paul, I, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy, as in utopian. The only thing missing is you. Check it out now at Amazon.com. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree, this book will definitely get your wheels turning. So, until next time, this is Tom Gruber saying, thanks for listening, and remember, maybe marital monogamy and single celibacy are not all there is. Bye for now.